Hi, Paul here from Spitfire Audio. I've got a short cue that I've written today, a kind of cinematic, very ambient, delicate, emotional sound. I'm using Gustavo's Ronroco, Appassionata strings and the cinematic soft piano, which actually I wrote this on. And the idea was that I would improvise something in. It's a couple of minutes long. I've tweaked my improvisation a little bit and then I've printed it out, and I'm using that as the basis for adding the melodies and the sounds on the Ronroco, but also on the Appassionata strings. I've just kind of followed my harmonies here and then improvised all the parts in real time. So let's have a quick listen down and then I'll dive in and show you what's going on. Okay, so let's have a look and see what I'm using and what kind of sounds I'm getting. So first up, on the main Ronroco part, which is here. So you can hear what I'm going for. I'm going for this kind of wide open vista, super wide shots, maybe desert, sunset, the idea of just kind of traveling. And so I want everything to have this kind of beautiful, very, I say very synthetic, kind of synthetic sounding long reverb. Now, what am I using here? I'll show you. I've got a bit of cinematic rooms on here. It's just the way that it loads up. So I'm just using the Amethyst Hall. And then I'm boosting that by layering it with Seventh Heaven. So I've got a super long 6-second decay time here on the Gold Hall. And with that, actually I could isolate these. So let me show you first up with just the cinematic rooms. Seventh Heaven. And then my final little trick bit of this sound is this very, very super bouncy reverb, the CLA Epic. Just check this out. You can hear it's multi-layered. There's lots and lots of cool stuff going on there, and it's giving me an undulating component to the tail of the sound. When you put all of those together, you can hear you've got that really lovely kind of complex thing. Now, what am I doing here? I've got a slamming it through this Fairchild. And the reason I'm doing that is because if I turn it off, if I play that soft part again with the compressor on, you can hear it's the way that it's kind of pulling everything up and compressing my dynamic range so my loud notes are a bit softer, is bringing all of the tail information, the bouncy stuff and all that stuff into a certain dynamic slice that can then sit over my strings and my piano. Otherwise, the effect of the big tails and stuff will be slightly lost on the quieter notes. That's the purpose of that. So it's a slightly unrealistic sound, but it works well in context. What am I doing with the piano? So I'm using again the same reverb, Cinematic Rooms. It's a different instance, and I'm using it across the whole thing because I want to get consistency of sound. I'm also using a much longer reverb time. I've stretched it out on the strings reverb, and I'm tilting it in favor of the reverb sound as opposed to the reflections, the audio reflections. And the reason for that is because on the Appassionata strings, I'm only using the outriggers. So I'm already using quite a roomy sound. So if I turn the reverb off, and then back on. So all of this is contributing to giving me my kind of super wide open vista. And it's a good, I've got the sound of air baked into the Appassionata strings. And so having a complementary sounding reverb, it's less real in a way, but it has a really beautiful sound of its own. So what else? On the other Ronroco parts, I haven't got the compressor, and I'm doing these two sections left and right. So this is a little bit wider, so kind of 3 o'clock and 9 o'clock, and then these ones at the end where we go into this part is very, very wide. I'll just play those together. So they're kind of interlocking like that. Because I've got them playing as an accompaniment to the main solo part, I'm using the channel EQ on them. So I'm just dropping them by nearly 4 dB at the top end with the filter. And I'm not putting quite as much of the effects that I'm using on the main one as well. Just enough to give it a kind of sound, a bounce, keep it in the same kind of sound world. But what that does with those EQs, it stops me getting the melody confused with the backing parts. So I'm separating them by space and also separating them in their sound. The effect of dropping the high frequencies does have an effect of pushing them back in your ear, because high frequencies are attenuated by air more quickly, I guess. So they feel like they've gone back. So I'll show you what I'm using on this Ronroco part. I'm using the fantastic pattern engine that Mike's put in, and I'm using it. I'm not playing it just the same pattern, just solid all the way through. I've here, as you can see, I'm using it slightly differently. I'll just play that down so you can hear what I'm doing. One of the things that I'm doing as well is I'm keeping a lot of these things quite loose. And then at this point around 25 and to 27, 28, I'm starting to pull it tighter to the grid. You can hear that quite clearly if I just play from back here and I put the click on. So it's a very subtle change, but you can sort of see it in the strings MIDI because the strings take a little bit of time to kind of sound out, and also I'm shaping them quite a lot with the mod wheel. But I'm getting that kind of idea with the piano, and it's kind of locked back on here for this point. Why am I doing this? I'm trying to get the feeling initially where you have the piano plays something and then the strings kind of swell in after it. So the strings kind of almost like a piano pad, that kind of feel. And the Ronroco is very, very loose. Everything is kind of off, behind the beat. And then when I feel like I want to introduce more emotional part to it, I start to tighten it up a bit. So it feels more intentional, feels a little bit more urgent, I guess. And it's quite a subtle thing, but I feel that it gives you another dimension of control over emotion. So you don't have to just use the harmony, the modulation, to get your dynamic moves, the dynamic of the velocity dynamic of the piano and stuff like that. And the piano is it's soft even when you hit it hard, but you've still got some dynamic in there to use. What else? Is there anything else? I think that is pretty much it. Oh, let's look at my output chain. So I'm using ozone. It's not doing a massive amount, but it is kind of bringing everything up slightly. A little bit of dynamic, a little bit of exciter, a little bit of this stereo control here. And then my L2 is just the thing that I always stick on the end just to add another half a dB or whatever. I know people hate on it, but I do quite like the sound of it. So that often goes on at the end. But there's nothing drastic happening. It's all just kind of a little bit of fairy dust and polish. So I'm going to play the whole thing down again. I'll switch between the tracks again so you can see what's going on. But that's pretty much it. Very simple. So the last thing really to say is I've on the Ronroco part, which is improvised in as well, and I've kind of come up with a gesture that I use that kind of forms part of that line all the way through. But I've gone back in and added a couple of key switches, and it's just the It's just that slide up. Why didn't I play that in? So I've played with the velocity to get things like hammer-ons and to get my twiddles, but I haven't wanted to overdo it apart from that. So I didn't put loads of, drop-offs and slide-ups and stuff. I just kind of played it back and thought, where would that fit naturally? Where would I play it if I was actually playing it for real? And then added those in. It's super simple. You just overdub a key switch just before the note and it affects that note. I guess what I wanted to say was that it's super easy to play live, to really kind of just emote and play, and with only, the way that you connect the notes together and your dynamic, your velocity to control it. But also, if you listen to some of Mike's demos on the website, you can really go deep on the programming, and you can create something that is just almost indistinguishable. That's the word I'm looking for, from the real thing. And in fact, I think Gustavo gave him some pointers and said, "Oh, if you change that, that would be the way that I would play this particular section." So they're really, really beautiful. So do check those out. But here it's just a simple, quick writing exercise showing how you can use it to create this kind of lovely kind of ambient feel. So I hope there's a few things in there that maybe you can use in your own compositions. As ever, thank you very much for watching, and see you on the next one. Okay, bye-bye.